As I mentioned, this chapter is about how we behave in the presence of others, and social influence is no small part of that. Two of the ideas that your book talks about are social facilitation and social interference. And it turns out that there are times when just being around other people in a group improves our performance. For example, I think your book talks about, and even if it doesn't, it's still true, that people riding bicycles will ride faster, will ride with more effort in the presence of other people. It's just being around people sometimes helps you do better. But there's a flip side to that. Sometimes being around people interferes, and it causes impairment, and it can also lead to social loafing. I suspect if you've ever done group work in any of your classes, you've run into this, where somebody's kind of being the parasite. I don't know, maybe it was you. So sometimes people loaf, but there's also just the fact that we don't always try as hard in a group. Your book talks about an experiment where people are brought into a group room and they get the headphones on, so they're noise cancellation headphones, and they're told they need to yell. And if the people are told that others are yelling with them, they don't yell as loud. So why would that be? Well, the idea is the diffusion of responsibility, which we'll have much more to say about in a few minutes. So know that there is this thing called social influence, and it's how we're affected by the presence of others. Are we okay on light, or should I have had the light turned back on? So we're looking good? Okay. As long as nobody snores, I'm watching you. No, that's your job. You don't snore, though. You just kind of go, you're closer to narcolepsy. So altruism is a form of social behavior. And altruism gets at this idea of acting on someone else's behalf with unselfish motivations. It's the basic idea. Helping someone out when there's nothing in it for you, at least on the surface. So that's what altruism is. Helping the little old lady across the street. You know, maybe helping somebody with their homework, or just holding a door open, all these sorts of things. We see altruism not just in humans, but we see it across species. And it's led to this kind of strange idea of reciprocal altruism. And what's going on here is the idea that, I don't know why this is, there we go. What's going on with reciprocal altruism is the notion that there is an anticipation that the favor will be returned. The big example of this that's used probably most frequently is prairie dogs. Have you seen prairie dogs before? Does everybody know what a prairie dog is? It's not like a hound dog on the prairie. So it's like a little rodent. In fact, it's so like a little rodent, it is a little rodent. And they live in burrows and colonies. And they will stick their heads out of their burrows and kind of look around before they go out and eat and all this other thing. In a colony of prairie dogs, you will have members that act as sentinels that are watching out for hawks and eagles, other birds of prey. Because if you're a prairie dog, one of these big birds dropping out of the sky will ruin your day. And so what the sentinel will do is if it sights one of these birds of prey, it'll sound the alarm. All well and good. The problem is, statistically, it turns out that if you're the prairie dog sounding the alarm, your chances of getting nailed are much higher. So this looks like altruism, doesn't it? But this leads us to this idea of reciprocal altruism, and the idea is that as a breeding group, as a colony, the overall survival rate improves if you have sentinels. And if you take turns being sentinels, if there's some sharing of that responsibility, then there's an adaptive advantage to altruism. So it turns out that altruism may be a misnomer. It may be that we have altruistic tendencies as a general thing we do because it's been adaptive throughout our evolutionary history. Makes sense. Now, does that mean that you're going to benefit somehow from helping the old lady across the street? Probably not in that particular case, but just the trait itself seems to have reciprocal value to it. Now, in contrast to altruism, at least in part, we have the bystander effect, which is a reluctance to come to someone else's aid when others are present. So that's the couple pieces to it. It's a reluctance to come to other people's aid when others are present. In 1968, Derry conducted a study in which they would stage in public someone having what appeared to be a seizure. And what was interesting about this study is if there was just one person around and someone fell out and started twitching on the ground, that one person would immediately come over to help. If there was a crowd of people around, that person could lay on the ground for some time twitching. You can find YouTube videos of this being reenacted and people, not reenacted, but this study being replicated. And it's amazing how people will just kind of walk on by when there's other people around. This gets us to the idea of diffusion of responsibility, which was featured in today's quiz. And the diffusion of responsibility is simply the tendency not to act or feel responsible in the presence of a group. The tendency not to act or to feel responsible in the presence of a group. And I bet without a lot of thought, you could think of circumstances where you've been in a group, you've seen something that was sketchy, that you kind of felt like, well, somebody needs to do something, and nobody did. How many times have you been at a party where someone has gone out to get their car and drive off when you've known, not that good of an idea, and you're just kind of waiting for somebody to step up and do something? The reason we don't is this behavioral trait of diffusion of responsibility.